On February 14, 2014, a 55-gallon drum of nuclear waste exploded underground in the waste isolation pilot plant in Carlsbad, New Mexico. The incident can be traced back to Los Alamos National Laboratory, where the barrel had come from. Since Los Alamos National Laboratory is a nuclear weapons design lab, chemical engineering plays a large role in the design of nuclear weapons. Chemical engineering can also be blamed for the explosion of the barrel in the waste isolation plant. The explosion was caused by the kitty litter used as an absorbent packing material. Normally, a clay-based, non-organic kitty litter would have been used, but since a new, organic kitty litter was used as a packing material, when the explosion went off, it sprayed a white radioactive foam everywhere in the waste isolation pilot plant. Luckily, no workers were underground, but 21 workers on the surface received a small, safe dose of radiation. At the moment, the predicted costs of cleanup are at $2 billion. If better chemical engineering had been applied, a non-organic kitty litter would have still been used, preventing the explosion.
Skylab was a space station designed to be an orbiting workshop to do research on stuff like how prolonged weightlessness will affect the human body. Because the project represented the next step towards wider space exploration, NASA put most of its work into getting it into orbit and staying there. Skylab was just planned for a 9-year lifespan, so because of this, NASA failed to build in any controls or navigation mechanics in order to return it onto Earth. Doing so would have costed too much, according to Administrator Robert Frosch, is what he said at the time. The lack of preparation became a problem in late 1978 when NASA engineers discovered that the station's orbit was decaying rapidly. It was becoming a 77-ton loose cannon. Because of this, Congress and the public demanded to know how NASA intended to avoid the human casualties and potential disaster because of this. So NASA used the new development, the space shuttle, to boost it into higher orbit, thereby extending its lifespan by about 5 years. After that, it continued to orbit as a shell, like the million other tons of floating debris known as space junk. But on July 11, 1997, Skylab started rapidly descending through orbit onto Earth. The engineers were freaking out, so they devised a plan to use the station's booster rockets to end up hopefully sending it into the Indian Ocean. They were close, but large chunks did scatter and litter all over the Western Australia, which was actually very populated. Thankfully, nobody was injured.
On August 2005, a Category 5 hurricane originating over the Bahamas struck the Gulf Coast of the United States. The city of New Orleans was particularly hit hard as subsequent flooding, caused largely because of fatal engineering flaws in the flood protection system, accounted for the majority of victims who lost their lives. The floods also damaged or destroyed most of the communication and transportation systems in the city, leaving thousands who were unable to evacuate at the time to be stranded without food, water, and other accommodations. The subsequent government response was poor, as it appeared that they were unprepared for the massive scale of Hurricane Katrina. The Federal Emergency Management Agency took days to begin relief operations in New Orleans. Relief coordinators and officials underestimated how many supplies were going to be needed, the amount of people stranded, and just how much of the city was destroyed. City officials admitted that they had no real plan as to how to tackle the issue. The Superdome in New Orleans was used as an emergency shelter, but was limited to only 15,000 people. Inside, supplies were extremely low and conditions were inadequate to host so many people. Even after the storms had passed, many more were killed due to thirst, exhaustion, and violence. As the situation failed to improve, the public began to feel desperate and chaos ensued as lootings began to stir in great numbers. In total, 1,833 people died. The National Flood Insurance Program paid out $16.3 billion in claims, as per CNN Katrina Fast Facts. While the initial catastrophe can be accounted towards Mother Nature and faulty flood preventative systems, which in subsequent investigation it was found that the United States Corps of Engineers were responsible for the building of these flood systems. The uncoordinated mess that happened afterwards was for the most part a communication and logistics error. There was a clear lack of strategy as different groups and the government could not agree on a plan. There were inadequate amounts of information possessed by these coordinators. The mayor of New Orleans delayed mandatory evacuation orders to be broadcasted until less than a day before the storm hit, and he would not allow school buses and disposal to be used instead of evacuation due to financial reasons. Essential supplies were in extreme shortage, and poor planning made the initial responses ineffective and inadequate. Today, Hurricane Katrina is remembered as the costliest disaster in the United States history.